For years, audiences believed they understood Al Bundy. He was the grumpy shoe salesman who hated his job, complained about his family, and sighed his way through life with a permanent look of defeat. Week after week, viewers laughed at his misery, treating him as just another exaggerated sitcom character. But decades later, the man behind Al Bundy, Ed O'Neill, finally revealed something that completely changed the way people look at the show. Long before Married with Children became a cultural lightning rod, before protests erupted and critics accused the show of destroying traditional television values, Ed experienced a moment that quietly shaped his entire performance. It happened early in the show's life during a scene that many fans remember only as a funny exchange. In the scene, Al Bundy begins talking about how life slowly crushes people's dreams. The conversation leads into a speech about a childhood dodgeball game, the one moment in his life when he felt like a winner. On the surface, it's played for laughs. Al grumbles about life being unfair, about hopes fading away, and about how sometimes the only victory a person ever gets happens when they are 12 years old in a gymnasium throwing a rubber ball. But something strange happened that day on set. When Ed finished delivering the speech, the room fell silent. Sitcom sets are almost never silent. Writers whisper. Crew members adjust lights. Someone laughs. But that day nobody spoke. The audience didn't react immediately. Even the crew members paused. Ed later said that was the first moment he realized Al Bundy wasn't just a joke. The emotion that came through during the speech surprised even Ed himself. He hadn't planned it that way. He had simply delivered the lines the way they felt natural. Yet something deeper had slipped into the performance without him consciously deciding to put it there. Eventually, the audience laughed, but the laughter felt different. Ed later described it as people laughing at something they didn't fully understand. For years, he never explained why that moment felt so powerful. When the show was first being developed, powerful television executive Barry Diller reportedly had serious doubts about Ed as the lead actor. At the time, Diller worked closely with Rupert Murdoch and held enormous influence over decisions at Fox. According to Ed's recollection, Diller supported casting Katie Sagal as Peggy Bundy, but wasn't convinced about Ed. Ed later remembered hearing something that stuck with him. They didn't want him because they had never heard of him. For an actor, there are few things more discouraging than being told you're simply not important enough to lead a show. Ed had spent years trying to establish himself, and hearing that kind of dismissal could easily have ended the opportunity before it even began. But the creators of the show saw something different. To understand why they believed in him, it helps to understand where the show itself came from. Married with Children did not begin as a traditional sitcom idea. It actually started as a reaction against the television landscape of the 1980s. Writers Michael Moy and Ron Levitt were frustrated by the kinds of families being portrayed on television. Every show seemed to feature warm, supportive households where parents were wise, children were respectful, and problems were solved neatly within 30 minutes. In the late 1980s, Fox was still a young network trying desperately to survive. It didn't have the long history or established programming of its competitors. Without something bold to attract attention, the network risked fading into irrelevance. So when executives saw the idea for Married with Children, they recognized something unique. Instead of asking the creators to soften the concept, they encouraged them to push it further. If the show was going to succeed, it needed to be completely different from everything else on television. That decision changed television history. Even with a daring concept, however, the show still needed the right actors. And casting the Bundy family turned out to be just as unusual as the show itself. Ed O'Neill didn't approach the role like most actors would. He didn't arrive with an elaborate performance prepared. In fact, when he walked into his audition, he barely acted at all. Katie Sagal walked into her audition already transformed into Peggy Bundy. She wore tight clothes, exaggerated makeup, and bright red hair. Her attitude perfectly captured Peggy's bold personality. She didn't just read the lines, she lived inside them. From the first moment, she understood Peg's unapologetic laziness and outrageous confidence. Christina Applegate joined the cast as Kelly Bundy when she was only 15 years old. Fox executives replaced the original actress because they felt the chemistry wasn't right. Christina brought a mixture of innocence and comedic instinct that quickly made the character memorable. At first, the rapid pace and edgy humor of the show sometimes overwhelmed her, but she adapted quickly. David Faustino was even younger when he earned the role of Bud Bundy. He had nervous energy and a fast delivery that sometimes rushed ahead of the jokes, but that same energy made Bud feel ambitious and awkward at the same time. Amanda Bearse completed the ensemble as Marcy, the Bundy's neighbor who constantly clashed with their chaotic lifestyle. Once the cast settled into their roles, something unexpected happened. They started to feel like a real family. Christina Applegate later said that the set quickly developed a strange sense of togetherness. The actors spent so much time together that the Bundy house almost began to feel like a second home. A magazine cover featured Ed O'Neill and Katie Sagal prominently, while leaving Amanda and David Garrison off entirely. Amanda felt hurt and undervalued by the decision. Ed chose not to challenge the network's promotional strategy at the time, something he later admitted he regretted. The tension worsened years later when Amanda got married and decided not to invite Ed to the ceremony. She believed his presence might make some guests uncomfortable. Katie Sagal was 7 months pregnant, and the writers had even planned to include the baby in the storyline. Then tragedy struck when she lost the child. Returning to work after such a loss was incredibly difficult for Katie. Ed later remembered watching her try to remain strong during rehearsals, even though the grief was visible in her eyes. One day, she quietly excused herself and went to the restroom. Ed suspected something was wrong and followed a few minutes later. When he gently opened the door, he saw her standing there crying. He didn't try to give a speech or offer advice. He simply hugged her. Sometimes silence can express compassion better than words ever could. Despite the emotional challenges behind the scenes, the show continued pushing television boundaries. Controversy soon became a regular part of the show's existence. One episode set inside a lingerie store triggered massive backlash. Conservative groups accused the show of promoting indecency and disrespecting traditional values. At one point, the pressure on Fox became so intense that executives worried the show might destroy the network's reputation. Another episode titled, "I'll See You in Court," caused even more alarm. The storyline involved a secretly recorded romantic encounter in a hotel room. In 1989, that premise was considered far too provocative for television. The Bundys weren't just a sitcom family anymore. They had become a cultural phenomenon. Guest appearances added even more unpredictable energy. Comedian Sam Kinison delivered one of the show's most unforgettable guest performances. His explosive style electrified the studio audience and pushed the entire cast to match his intensity. Ed later joked that acting opposite Kinison felt like trying to wrestle a hurricane. But the real secret behind Al Bundy had nothing to do with scandals or outrageous jokes. It was something far more personal. Years after the show ended, Ed finally explained where the character truly came from. During his audition, when he slumped into that chair and sighed, he wasn't acting. He was remembering someone. When Ed was growing up, he often heard stories about a man who worked endlessly to support his family. The man sometimes held 2 jobs, sometimes 3. He left the house before sunrise and returned late at night. Years of exhausting labor slowly wore him down. Family members said that when he was younger, he had hopes, maybe opening a small store or starting a business. But life never gave him the chance. Over time, he stopped expecting anything good to happen. Then one night, he went to bed and never woke up. When relatives found him the next morning, faint tear marks were still visible on his face. Ed had only seen photographs of the man, but the story stayed with him for years. So when he sat down during that audition, the memory surfaced without him planning it. But Ed knew the character was rooted in something real, the quiet exhaustion of people who work endlessly and still feel like life passed them by. When he finally shared that story, fans began seeing the character differently. Al Bundy wasn't just a joke. He was a reflection of countless ordinary people who carried disappointment silently. And in a strange way, Every time viewers laughed at AL's tired sigh, the memory of that forgotten man lived on. So the next time someone watches Married with Children and sees Al Bundy slouched on the couch, staring at the television with that familiar look of defeat, they might realize something deeper. Behind the comedy was a story about a real life. A life that worked hard, dreamed quietly, and slowly faded into exhaustion. Ed O'Neill never forgot that story. And because he carried it onto the screen, millions of people unknowingly witnessed its echo every week. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to check out the next video on the screen now for more surprising stories from television history.